I don't care if you're 15 years old, 55 years old, or somewhere in between. This video is for you. How many things are you doing right now that you never actually decided to do? Think about that. You drink something because everybody drinks it. You eat something because everybody eats it. You try something because somebody made it look cool. And before you know it, 10, 20, 30 years go by, and now it's just part of your life. But did you ever stop and ask yourself, do I even like this? Is this actually good for me? Why am I doing this? And who the hell taught me to live this way in the first place? I'm 54 years old now, and that's something I think about a lot. Life doesn't come with a playbook. When we're kids, somebody else puts up the guardrails. My parents didn't let me drink soda all the time or eat whatever I wanted. You can't smoke when you're a kid. You can't drink alcohol. These are things you might want to do because you see adults doing them, but somebody is still telling you no. Then you grow up and suddenly nobody's telling you no anymore, right? Now you can buy the cigarettes. You can drink the alcohol. You can eat whatever you want. But just because you can does not mean you should. And who decided these things were cool anyway? I've been living long enough to know that things can go from cool to uncool quickly and back again, right? So, who are we trying to impress? How many habits do we create because we just want to fit in? Or, then we realize years later that we never really wanted them in the first place. Smoking is a perfect example for me because I smoked cigarettes until I was 34 years old. And when I look back now, I think, why the hell did I ever start? They were nasty. I remember the first time trying it. I wasn't born wanting a cigarette. At some point, I picked up the habit. And then I had to work to get rid of it. Soda is another example for me because when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I started drinking a lot more soda, especially Pepsi, and I ended up with three cavities. And those particular teeth have continued to give me problems over the years, over my other teeth. Eventually I stopped drinking soda, though, thank goodness. My point isn't that one Pepsi, ruined my teeth. My point is that, sometimes, we create a habit today and don't think about what it might cost us later. The consequences don't always show up right away. You know, that's why I think we need to learn to ask better questions before something becomes a 20-year habit. One of those biggest lessons for me came later when I started drinking smoothies. Not full of sugar, but they had some fruit, maybe more greens in them, right? I was dealing with acid reflux, chest pains, gout, and many other health problems at the time. I was in my early 30s, and I started drinking these smoothies every morning. And literally within a couple weeks, I noticed major improvements in a lot of what I've been dealing with. And I remember thinking, why didn't I know this earlier? You know, why did I know about the soda, the cigarettes before I really understood any nutrition? Why didn't somebody teach me when I was young to think about taking care of this body for the next 80 or 100 years? I'm going to drop the link for the smoothie in the description for you guys. So if you guys want to check it out. But, I had a dog that lived to be 14 and a half years old. You know, she didn't decide what food to buy. You know, she didn't decide whether it was safe to run into the street. I had to think ahead for her. You know, but Eventually I realized something though. At some point we have to learn to do that for ourselves. When you're young, somebody else may be putting up the guardrails, but eventually the leash comes off. Now you're responsible for you. You have to think about the future version of yourself and ask whether the decisions you're making today are taking care of that person. There is no perfect playbook for life. Nobody has all the answers. I don't, for sure. But today we have access to more information than we ever have before. We have science, history, philosophy, you know, books, research and other people's experiences. We don't have to make every mistake ourselves. But not all the information is good information, that's for sure, right? So the challenge today in this world is just finding information, it's learning what to believe. And that's where discernment comes in, right? It's a word that most people are not familiar with because they don't know how to discern. I think about I think about the old TV show, the series, right? Kung Fu, and the master teaching Grasshopper. He didn't always just give him an answer. He gave him something to think about. He planted a seed, and Grasshopper had to learn how to navigate the world. I think we still need that today, except now part of the navigation is knowing how to research, ask questions, compare information, and think for ourselves. There's an idea associated with Malcolm X that I've always liked. It's read broadly, you know, because you never know where you might get an idea, and that's how I try to live. I ask everybody questions, people I agree with, people I disagree with, even my students. Not because I believe everything everybody tells me, but because one idea makes you see something differently. And I think Socrates said it, the best, right? He said the unexamined life is not worth living. Examine your life, right? Examine your habits, examine where they came from. Because I've lost a lot of people in my life and I've watched people I cared about suffer. And sometimes I wonder what might have been different if somebody had gotten through to them earlier. Some of them, right? Not all. But, what if they had learned something at 20, instead of 50? I don't know. Who knows? We can't go backwards though, right? But maybe we can help somebody who hasn't started yet. Maybe you're 15. Maybe you're 50. Maybe you're 75. It doesn't matter. As long as you're still here. As long as you're still here, you can still ask questions. You can still learn, you can still change something. And that's really what this channel is about. It's about health, longevity, getting stronger, making better food choices, discipline, mindset, learning how to think for yourself and to deal with your own brain. You know, I'm not here because I figured everything out. I don't, but I'm still learning. But if something I've learned can help somebody else avoid a mistake, make a better decision, or ask a better question, then I want to share it. So ask yourself, did I actually choose that habit? You know, do I even like it? You know, is it making me stronger? Is it making me healthier? Is it helping me become the person I want to be? Life doesn't come with a playbook, but maybe we can build a better one question at a time, one lesson at a time, one habit at a time. We can learn from history, learn from science, learn from our own mistakes, but also learn from other people's mistakes so you don't have to repeat every damn one yourself. You know, if that's the kind of journey you're on to, subscribe and stick around because that's what we're doing here. Real lessons, practical change, a stronger life. The goal isn't just to collect more information. The goal is to develop the wisdom to know which information deserves a place in your life. Have a good day.